wrestle now? Can I arm wrestle now?
Equal parts confident swagger and tenacious athleticism, Andrew Cobra Rhodes has been around the arm wrestling scene longer than most, becoming an icon within the culture. But how much arm wrestling prowess truly lies behind his exuberance? And what are the ups and downs throughout his career that led him to become the legend he's so widely considered to be now? I am the Arm Historian, and just like before, I'll be your tour guide while we attempt to make brighter the ever-growing legacy of one of arm wrestling's most enigmatic athletes and discuss the rise and fall of Andrew Cobra Rhodes. I just want to make it clear once again that I have a tremendous amount of respect for all the athletes I cover in the rise and fall. It's just a title, that's all. Andrew Rhodes was born in 1965 to two hard-working parents and was preceded by his three older sisters. Andrew's father ran a dry cleaning business and would sometimes take his son along on deliveries, as evidenced from one of Andrew's earlier memories, taking in the smell of dry cleaner in his dad's van at the age of 4.
I used to deliver back then in 60s. I remember when I was 4 or 5 years old driving in his delivery vans and the smell of the dry cleaner. But yeah, my dad was a hard-working man, real loving man, real solid dude.
By the time Andrew was a young teenager, aged 11, he first discovered arm wrestling, competing with other children at his school. 3 years later, it seems like Andrew had become known as the arm wrestling kid in his school, pointing to quite the obsession with the sport, even from such a young age. By this time, the youngster was taking on high school coaches, and sometimes even arm wrestled for money with out-of-school kids. During the early 80s, Andrew was well and truly hooked on the sport and sought out training partners that would help him reach his full potential. Mike Petrarca was a well-established arm wrestler that would frequently organize arm wrestling practices around Rhode Island, welcoming people of every level of proficiency in the sport. The young Andrew fit right in and started quickly improving, all the while joining his training partners at several local and national tournaments and doing really well at them. From an early age, it became quite clear that Andrew preferred a hand-dominant technique on the table, something he would develop even further during the rest of his career. His nickname, Cobra, a moniker he still proudly wears to this day, seemingly was given to him because of the visual appearance of his arm wrestling style. As an extension of that, one of the things Andrew would become known for was the exploding hand technique. This awesomely named technique is not so much one single move, but rather a mindset, or philosophy if you will, while arm wrestling, at least according to Cobra himself.
So is it fair to say that exploding hand technique is both philosophy and making that philosophy appear on the table? It's not just a move.
Yeah. You got it, Uncle John.
One infamous incident, and perhaps even the reason why the technique was named the exploding hand technique, happened when Andrew faced the Latvian Jānis Amelins and nearly split his hand in two while applying the move.
That's my exploding hand technique. Ask Jānis. Winner!
In 1986, production commenced on the arm wrestling themed movie Over the Top, starring Sylvester Stallone. Cobra, even at such a young age and this early in his career, got hired as a consultant for the arm wrestling techniques featured during the matches in the movie, as well as hired as an actor, portraying a referee for the final match.
Sly Stallone was doing a film about arm wrestling, and they chose me as one of the athletes to work with him, work with his technique. And after working with him, he threw me the little part as a referee in the final 2 matches of the film.
During the latter part of the 1980s, now in his early 20s, Cobra would seemingly ramp up his obsession and prowess for the sport to an even bigger degree, the kind of unbridled commitment one would expect to see from a young talented man attempting to make a name for himself. It appears he did just that by doing consistently well at the AAA Nationals, a tournament that would have both sit-down and stand-up editions, and functioned as one of the main tests of arm wrestling in North America at the time. Cobra would get podium positions at these tournaments even well into the 90s, getting a first-place finish at the 89, 91, and 1993 editions. Super Bras de Fer was a huge televised invitation-only arm wrestling event held in 1991 in France. In all likelihood, the event was designed to emulate the success of the massively popular Over the Top tournament. Cobra was one of a select group of pullers invited to the event and ended up taking first in the 80 kg category and fourth in the overalls. One funny detail regarding this tournament is that a prize was also awarded to the athletes that put on the best show while arm wrestling, something Cobra obviously took as a challenge. This serves as a clear early example of Andrew's exuberance and showmanship on the table. The story of this tournament is extremely interesting in its own right and probably deserves a separate video in the future. Now back to Cobra. In 1990, 92 and 93, Andrew competed in the always stacked Yukon Jack tournaments and got a second, first and third place, respectively.
Do you have the strength? Do you have the guts? Do you have the pride? Do you have what it takes to be a part of Yukon Jack Mania?
During this time, Cobra also didn't shy away from competing at the highest level internationally, getting several first-place finishes at the WAF Worlds, and becoming the de facto poster boy of successful international American pullers, next to John Brzenk, of course. In 1998, Cobra entered and won 2 big tournaments with a serious prize payout. First in the second edition of the main event, and after that also taking a first-place victory in the Forza Tropical Championships held in Curacao. This last tournament became quite infamous for at one point experiencing a blackout, leading to athletes having to arm wrestle, illuminated by flashlights, and having a small but experienced athlete turnout, with John Brzenk's wife even taking a first place and substantial payout by default. To top off the decade, also in 99, Cobra tried his hand yet again at the WAF Worlds and garnered another first place victory, becoming world champion yet again. That year, at the very same tournament, taking place in Russia, Cobra also absolutely dominated the competition in the overall class, even at such a relatively low weight. A lot of people will point to this period in time as being Andrew Cobra Rhodes' absolute peak in the sport of arm wrestling. When the new millennium rolled around, Andrew would continue to distinguish himself as one of the top arm wrestlers around by winning the Arnold Classic in 2000 and snagging a third place in the 2001 edition. He also managed to take the podium at the famous 2000 Petaluma World Wrist Wrestling Championship with a second place in the lightweights and third place in the middleweights. In 2000, Cobra also participated in the Harley Pulls, a notorious arm wrestling tournament with a Harley bike on the line. He lost out in the overall finals that day versus John Brzenk and walked away with a second place and an extra $500. He would go on to compete in many more Harley Pulls after this throughout the next decade and consistently did really well, even winning the coveted bike in the 2008 edition. Despite having become a mainstay of the American as well as the international arm wrestling world by now, Cobra himself still felt somewhat like an outsider. Later, in interviews, he would talk about never having been fully accepted by a lot of heavily entrenched people in the community during the early parts of his career. To a degree, this might have affected his mentality and might be part of what ultimately led to a mindset of extreme tenacity in having to prove himself. He would go on to refer to himself as somewhat of a fly in the milk, perhaps in part because of the obvious lack of diversity and representation at the highest level of our sport.
I was a fly in the milk.
Okay.
At a different time.
I'm with you.
And a lot of folks weren't shy about letting you know that, but I loved my parents already. I was already in the game.
2001 would prove to be a pivotal moment in Andrew's arm wrestling career though. He would become involved in a major car accident, resulting in serious bodily injuries. Cobra would go on to talk about this incident at length during several interviews and stresses not only the physical toll it took on his body, but also the serious mental strain he experienced as a result. Although somewhat disputed by the great results he still managed to get after this, a lot of people will say Cobra never again reached the same peak in arm wrestling as he did before the accident. Andrew's arm wrestling career, however, was far from over. He continued to remain somewhat active on the peripheries, but came out and showed the world he was still relevant at the elite level by doing consistently well at big tournaments between 2008 and 2013. He podiumed at the 2007 Ruler of the Nation tournament and even entered 4 more editions of the Arnold Classic, snagging a first place in the 80kg division in 2013. Cobra also became somewhat of a mainstay of the UAL, competing in their tournaments as well as super matches. In 2010, he also ventured back to the prestigious WAF Worlds and earned himself a first-place victory in the 80kg Masters division. During the next years, and well and truly into the 2010s now, Andrew became a mainstay of the Arm War Super Series, facing off against many different opponents. Although he didn't always walk away with the win, audiences were treated to some of the most all-in arm wrestling matches in existence. Cobra never shied away from pulling in what looked to be some of the most uncomfortable positions on the table imaginable. This not only showed he could still hang with some of the more accomplished pullers around, but that his showmanship was still a hotly searched after commodity in any competitive arm wrestling event. Now in 2013, the PAL, run by Igor Mazurenko, was trying to solidify its foothold in the North American arm wrestling scene. One point of attack was making Cobra the official face of the organization, probably wanting to take advantage of the fact that Cobra was still for many one of the most recognizable people in our sport. However, not long after, now in 2014, Rhodes would perhaps experience new heights as far as exposure towards the world at large. A new reality TV show revolving completely around arm wrestling and its athletes was set to debut on AMC. Cobra's outgoing and somewhat eccentric character, as well as his previous on-screen experience, looked to be the perfect recipe for a reality TV show.
It's really been simple. I mean, I've been in the business since the early 80s, you know, and as far as show business, however you want to put it, but I found this to be the easiest thing I've ever done because I've just been myself. There's no lines to read, there's no markers or placements or anything. It's just raw. Just be yourself. You can't mess that up.
If you want to learn more about Game of Arms and Cobra's role in it, be sure to take a look at my video on the topic. Cobra is great in the show and it's an entertaining watch all around. From 2014 onwards, in part because of the connections and impression he had made during Game of Arms, Cobra started participating in and became an integral part of the World Arm Wrestling League. The man proved to be a crowd favorite on the MC show 1 year earlier, something that would be no different in this league. Rhodes featured prominently in several super matches in the league and would do relatively well in both the tournament and super match era. If you want to know more about the WAL and its inception, check out my video on the topic. With arm wrestling seeing a potentially unprecedented growth in the wake of the COVID pandemic, it seems Cobra Rhodes too would heed the call of competitive arm wrestling once again. After dipping his toe in the local arm wrestling scene and trying to shake the rust off, an opportunity presented itself to pull on the big stage. In November of 2022, Cobra was set to face the Turkish arm wrestler Haydar Gildil in a Legend Super match at East vs West 5. While Andrew put up quite a fight in the early part of the match, it soon became apparent that the strength gap was too big to overcome, and Haydar comfortably took the match. While this seems to have somewhat derailed Andrew's return to the competitive scene, he would later feature prominently in a later edition of East vs West. This time appearing off the table and more in a hosting capacity, conducting athlete interviews, participating in the press conference, and all around helping with the goings-on at the event. Personally, I'd love to see Cobra stick around for many years to come, in whatever capacity he deems possible for himself. Despite being in the public eye as much as he was throughout his arm wrestling career, Cobra's legacy remains largely controversy-free, not an easy feat especially compared to some other subjects of the Rise and Fall series. One thing that stood out especially to me was the fact that while I was doing research for this video, I heard nothing but good things from Cobra's peers in the sport. In fact, when talking to other arm wrestlers and friends of Cobra, I heard anecdote after anecdote of him being a stand-up guy and someone they truly looked up to in the sport. One such story that I feel serves as a good illustration of Cobra's character comes courtesy of Jody Williams, who was eager to show me a treasured gift he received from Cobra. Jody was dealing with a very tragic personal loss at the time and happened to run into Cobra at a local tournament. When Jody wasn't looking, Rhodes handed his 1999 WAF Worlds gold medal to Jody's wife and said to her, "Tell your husband to hold on to this." The next day, while driving to the airport, Jody's wife told him about what had happened and showed him the gifted medal. Even in my own limited interactions I've had with Andrew Cobra Rhodes, he's been nothing less than supportive and extremely generous with his time. Andrew Cobra Rhodes is a name that has become synonymous with not only arm wrestling, but in a way has become synonymous with what it means to be an arm wrestler. I'm sure I failed to include several accomplishments and significant moments in the man's arm wrestling life, but believe that I have clearly illustrated that he has won basically every title under the sun. He's someone who, throughout his long and storied career in the sport, has, as far as I can tell, never relented in being unapologetically himself, on and off the table. Despite facing setbacks, his no-holds-barred spirit on the table and willingness to help others never faltered, something that served to make Andrew Cobra Rhodes, in this humble arm's opinion, one of the most respected and shining symbols of our modest sport. Thank you to everyone still watching, and thank you to Eric Roussan, Neil Pickup, and Jody Williams in specific for filling in some gaps in my knowledge. Major gratitude also goes out to the main man himself, Cobra Rhodes, for being so cool about it. And of course, as always, a massive shout out to all the Armians and Finger folks. You guys keep me in the game. Arm Historian, out.